So can you all hear me? Um, so a couple things in the beginning. One, again, please don't spam the chat. Don't use other conversations because we'll be putting some important links. And the other thing is, welcome to Introduction to Python. So I think we're ready to start. A bit about this class. So we're going to be going over for 4 weeks, and every week we're going to talk about another aspect of the simplest basics of Python. As you can see in the chat, we have the slides for today's lesson. So after this is over, you can access this or watch them as the class goes along. So today we'll be talking about variables and their types, and then we'll move on to flow control, and we are going to go over to loops and turtle graphics near the end, and they're all really cool. Throughout this entire process, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me or type it in the chat, or even just raise your hand because then I can try and unmute you. So what is Python? Let's look at the dictionary definition. It says a large, heavy-bodied, non-venomous constrictor snake occurring throughout the Old World tropics. That's not the Python we're using. The Python we're talking about is a high-level general-purpose programming language. So Python is a great language for so many reasons. It's available for all ages, and people are able to use it for so many different things. It's also really fun to learn, and for a lot of people here, they're around grades, I assume, 3 to 6, right? Can you guys type into the chat what grade you're in? Okay, so a lot of 3, 4, 5, I see a 7. Okay. That's really great because it's a great experience right now for you to learn early on because later in life, whatever you end up doing, Python is really great to apply to other things. For example, I learned Python in around 2nd to 3rd grade, so there's really no age. Wow, 1st grade, okay. So there's really no um, earliest age in order to learn. It's used in a lot of IT companies, so if you want to become a programmer when you grow up, Python is an amazing first language. A lot of things people have asked are, where are we going to access this? So right now, as you go along, I'm not going to directly tell you to type some things in unless I have the example, but you can access this on anything. Like you can use PyCharm or you can use Trinket. And if you don't have an idea right now, we recommend the site starcoder.org/playground. It's in the thing. Again, please don't talk about Roblox in the chat. And so take a second to try and open it and type in the chat when you're ready. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people are ready. So as you can see right here, the StarCoder site should look something like this, and you have the playground with the Python terminal. So in Python, there are a couple things we need to note before we start. This is the playground, and as you can see in this, as you can see in this GIF, we have these two sides of Python. Whatever you use should have this. On one side, we have this console where all of our code goes. So we can type things like print or later commands that we learn. And when we hit this button, the play button, as you can see in the GIF, it ends up running and showing whatever we choose to display on the right side. The first thing we're going to try and do is basically take things from the left side and print it on the right side, just as if you're on a computer and you're pushing the print button to actually print it out on paper. What we can do is feel free to also type it along. You type print, and right here we can type whatever we want. Right now, let's try hello world. And when you're able to type this out, congrats, you've typed your first Python. program, and you can push play. Okay, so Melissa asked a really good question. Why do you need the quotes? This is really important for later on, and we will go over that. Type in the chat when you finish this program or if you have any problems. Okay, Hen, I think hopefully I pronounced that right. Type your question out. Good question. So typically so you guys, right now we're in quarantine, right? So when your teachers at school give you assignments and they ask you to print out papers, you click the Command P or you click the little printer button to print it out, right? So when that happens, you can imagine Python as doing the exact same thing, but online. We can ask to print these things, and we can ask our computer to actually print it in, and then it will print it out. Okay, for this bit, try and experiment printing out different things. I'm gonna try and help. Okay, so I can see people are raising their hands. Do you have questions? Let me see. Okay, I think everyone kind of hopefully understands how this works. If you guys are raising your hand, could you type your question for now? Or here, let me just unmute one at a time.
So, normally for Python, I use the idle 3.6.1 shell. Can you use this instead of this star coder thing?
Yes, you can use any Python thing you want. Right now, the version shouldn't matter too much.
Oh.
Sorry, right now I'm just going to be taking questions. Feel free to type it in.
So when you finish writing it, do you press enter to get it into the right part?
Oh, sorry. You print the run. Sorry. In order to get your program to work, you have to click the run button.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Angela, you can type it out. Yeah. Okay, this is a good question. Does it matter if you have parentheses or not? In some versions, it doesn't matter, but one of the great things to do is you can try and experiment and see if it works. some versions don't require it, but I'm pretty sure like later errors after 3 point something, it does require it. So when you have a thing like this where you're not sure, the best thing to do is to include it, because in order to if you end up working in earlier versions in some other computer, then you need to have this good habit. So technically it isn't required for most things, but it's still a good habit. Okay. Yes, you can use Council instead of the main program. I think we're pretty good. Okay.
I just want to ask, not to be rude or anything, but isn't like coding supposed to be like coding cartoons and stuff, like animation, not
Okay,
words?
this is a really good question. So coding in general, it's not just about animations. Yes, you can code animations, but it takes a bit of background knowledge first. So this course, especially because it's only around 4 weeks long, is just about the basics. And if you do want to go up into animation, it's a kind of separate part of Python that we will go over in week 4. So coding is about animations, but it's not just about animations, and we need to go over some stuff before we get there. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, I think we can move on to the majority of the actual lesson. Today we're going to be talking about variables, and variables are a part of Python that are really interesting. So you can think about variables as kind of like a single container. You have an object. Okay, how many of you use like bags or boxes to store items? A lot of people, right? So when you use things to store items, Python also has these things called variables, which are kind of like bags. Yes, please delete print hello world because you're kind of resetting the program. So we can just delete this. Variables, the important thing to know about variables is that typically they can only hold one value. And when you have multiple bags all over, in Python, what you do is you name these variables. So we give, for example, here, box 1, this contains this value of the word Bob, or this contains the number 35. Variables contain one value and they have a name in order to refer to them. This kind of doesn't make sense, but let's look at it. Let's say I want to hold a pencil, but let's say I want to hold the number 3 because the number 3, I like the number 3. So what we can do is we can give this thing a name. Let's call it variable 1. And in order to assign the value of 3 to variable 1, we give it an equal sign. It's very simple. Try running this. Nothing should print out, but nothing should run an error either. Type in the chat when you're done. Okay. So the thing with variables that we can notice is that you can't actually hold an item like a pencil. Yes, sorry, I will go a little bit slower. So in real life, where we can kind of take our bags and put all these different objects in, we can't really do the same thing with something online because, well, it's online. So Tianyang Dong, sorry, my Chinese is really bad, asks, how can you reset a variable? And the thing is, you can't really, but you can assign it new values to overwrite it. Like if I assign variable 1 the value of 3 right now, I can go back and I can reassign it 2. What do you think this would print? Would the value be, oh sorry, let's say I'm going to print variable, what value do you think it would print out? See, this is where it's really interesting. Okay, if I'm, if, let's say I have a box that can only contain one thing, right? The thing with Python is that when you take out the first value and you replace it with something new, as Alex says, 2 because the variable is now 2, we can take this variable, we can imagine this bag called variable 1, right? And initially it held the value of 3. But now that we're assigning it value 2, there's no space for 3. So we take out 3 and the value of variable 1 is 2. And as Randy says, the easiest way to figure out what the value of the variable is whatever the latest thing you have assigned it is the actual value. So it's kind of like resetting it. As you can see here, if we type this out, it prints out 2. So you can technically name your variables lots of different things, literally any word in the alphabet. Quotations we will talk about soon, so stay tuned. Right, so a variable name, it has a couple of rules in order to make sure that you don't accidentally run an error. In Python, pretty much the only problem you can have is running an error. So let's look at the rules here. A variable name has to start with the letter or the underscore character. It can't start with a number and it has to contain alphanumeric characters. Right now, what this means is that you can't have characters that are like $sign or hashtag or parentheses inside of a variable name. You can only use words, numbers, and the underscore. Let's look right here. We have this variation of myvar. By the way, the abbreviation of variables is, I will get to that. The abbreviation of variables is var, V-A-R. And one thing to note is that you can't have things like a number in the front or a space, especially because you only have this one character. Okay, so notice that when we print stuff out, we have the keyword like print being a different color in some terminals, right? So variables are important because you can't have certain names. Again, so there are these things in Python called keywords that you have to avoid. And the easiest way to tell something is a keyword is if it changes a different color. So we have 4, which is a keyword, and that means you can't assign the value of 4 to, say, a number 3. So we need to make sure that when we name our variables, it follows these rules. And the easiest way to make sure that you follow the rules is just give them all letters and maybe 1 or 2 numbers in the end. Okay, so let's talk about integers. Right now, all of the examples of variables. So Melissa asks, what happens if you print a variable that you didn't define? Again, in Python, if you want to create things, the easiest way to do things is to actually try them out in the terminal. So we can print, let's say we have the variable name a, and let's run it. So as you can see down here, it ends up running an error because we haven't defined a. So let's talk about integers. So you guys have learned math, right? What do you think is the most advanced thing you've learned in math so far? Type it in the chat. So we have some advanced stuff here: coordinate grids, paranoias, calculus, pi, negative number multiplication. Okay, so in Python, we can do the majority of these things just like we do in basic math. So how many of you understand the concept of whole numbers? Great. So just to review, or for those who don't understand, whole numbers are counting numbers, which are like 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. All of the positive whole numbers, 0 and negative numbers. So make sure that when you think of an integer, you have no decimal points. It's all whole numbers. And just like in math, we have the basic operations, right? Addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So in Python, we can use the typical notation for these. And as you can see in this GIF, we can add and subtract numbers. So let's actually try typing this out. For this part, you can pick like any two numbers you want because it really doesn't matter. So we can have 4 and 3, and we can try printing these two added together. So the value of variable 1 and variable 2 would be 4 and 3, which are both integers because they're whole numbers. And if we were to print this out, what do you think it would print? So a lot of people are typing out 7 because 4 plus 3 is 7. As you can see, it does print out 7. So try actually writing this code out. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people are finishing. Okay, try experimenting with this. Do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and then anything interesting you find, type it in the chat. Okay, so Ethan asks, how do we do multiplication? As you can see here, just like if you were typing it out on a keyboard, multiplication would be this right here. Subtraction is the subtraction sign, and okay, has anyone tried dividing anything yet? Okay, let's look at this. If we divide something, right? If we multiply these two numbers, we get, of course, their thing. But what if we divide? We'll get to that in a second, Angela. So notice right here that we get a number that isn't whole. And it's important to note that if we change variable 2 to 2, we get 2.0. So this is very different in Python. 2.0 and just 2 are two different values. And so Angela asks, what is double slash? Well, we have this thing called a float that we'll go over. And when you add a single slash, what it returns is it returns a float. It returns a decimal. So a float is any decimal number. And we can see here that 2, the value of 2 is 2, right? But if we turn it into a float, we get 2.0, and it has a decimal point. So people have been asking, what is the double slash? The double slash basically what it does is it returns a whole number. For example, if we have 4 and 2 here, right? If we add a single slash, it returns 2.0. And the thing with 2.0 is that it's not an integer because it has a decimal point. But if we add a double slash, it ends up being 2, aka a whole number. So what if we divide two numbers that don't actually divide evenly? Then we get the largest whole number that is basically the variable 1 divided by variable 2, and then we can imagine it is like the rounded down version of an integer. So it's flooring it because it's taking the largest whole number that is smaller than the value. Okay, so way up there somewhere in the chat, I believe someone asked how to do something to the power of something. And first of all, how many of you guys have learned about power so far? I think most of you, some of you. So this isn't as important, but something to the power of something should simply be, wait, no, that's wrong. Nope, that's wrong. Okay, sorry. Anyways, so one thing we can notice is that floats have a certain value. And if we are going to do variable 1 to the power of variable 2, this is where, yes, I'm getting to that. This is where we can't just simply do the actual power sign because that doesn't work. Instead, we have to use two multiplication signs. And that's not working. Let's just ignore this segment. Anyways, floats have two very different versions. So we have the decimal way, which is the standard way, and then we have the scientific representation. Has anyone learned about scientific notation yet? Go. So it's not as important right now, but the idea of scientific notation is what you need to know is it's a normal number, right? Let's say 2, and then you multiply it by 10 to the power of something. So let's say I want to multiply 4 by 10 to the power of 1. What value would that be? Okay, the question was multiplying the value of 2 by 10 to the power of 1. What would that equal? Right, 20, because you have 2 times 10. And the thing we can note is that in Python, for floats, we can use this thing called e. So in order to create scientific notation, we can assume that 10 to the power of something is equal to e. So what this means is that if we want to create 20, right? So let's say we have variable 1 and it's equal to 2. If we print variable 1 right now, then we would simply get 2. But if we print variable 1 to e1, we can treat e as the value of 10 to the power of something, and then whatever number comes after e is the little power thing. So that would be 20.0 because it's a float. So notice back when we printed hello world, we added quotation marks around it. And this is because it's called a Python string. So a string is a sequence of characters surrounded by quotation marks. And the only reason it's surrounded by quotation marks is so that we can differentiate between strings and actual Python commands. Like if we have variable 1, someone give a simple word in the chat. Hi, okay. So if we want to create the value of hi as a string, aka a sequence of words, then we can write hi. What do you think happens when I print this out? Hi, right? Because we typed hi, and therefore it will print hi. Notice that there aren't the quotation marks anymore because these are just simply used to show that it is a string. And the difference between strings and most other things is that, first of all, it can't really be affected by other things, but it can it can be anything. Like you can put special characters like the $ inside here, and it won't bother or matter. Another thing so Melissa asks, what about single quotes? Another important part about strings is that you can use both double quotes and single quotes, but you can't use them together. I don't know if that probably doesn't make sense. Okay, so as you can see here on the slides, we have a double quote here and a double quote here in order to say that these two, anything inside of these two is a string. And similarly, we can do the exact same thing with single. There are no triple. So Randy asks, what about triple quotes? That doesn't work because it's not really the idea. And okay, so you need to make sure that, okay, just like when we use parentheses, you can't have a circle parentheses and then square parentheses because that doesn't work. So we have, if we start something off and then we write, this is my string, then we have to end it with the other quote. If we use triple parentheses, you can honestly just kind of think about it as using single quotes, and then having the string be this. Because right here, when we add these quotes inside of the single quotes, we're basically treating them as part of the string. So what do you think this would print out? Be very careful about it. Right, so it would print out, this is my string with the quotes. Yep, because these are part of the string now, because they're inside of the outside quotes. So you could add a ton of random quotations in here, and it probably wouldn't change anything as long as they were all paired together. Okay. Now, strings have a whole ton of commands that are kind of different, but one thing that we can remember is concatenation. String concatenation is adding two strings together. So again, someone in the chat write a statement or like half a sentence. Okay, my name is Bob. And let's say the string 2 is equal to hi, bye. In order to add strings together, we simply use the addition sign. So just like you can add 2 plus 3, just take a wild guess. What do you think happens when I add variable 1 plus variable 2? Okay, so before I continue, Aaron asked why I skipped line 3, and then the simple reason for this is that it doesn't matter whether or not I skip extra lines, but when you end up coding a lot of like big text, you kind of want to separate the text sometimes. So out of habit, I added the extra line, but it really doesn't make a difference for my actual program. So let's continue. This prints out my name is Bob, hi, bye. So the interesting thing about this is that there's no space added in between. As Melissa asks, why are Bob and hi one word? There is no space being added because at the end of this, it's simply over at B, and it starts here at H. So how do you guys think we can add a space between the two strings? Okay, so there are a lot of different ways to do it. And right, so as Ethan says, we can add it, the simplest way is to add a space at the start of one or the end. So we can add this, or we can add this here, and then it ends up adding a space. Okay, let's say instead of actually adding these two, we want to create a new variable, variable 3. And string concatenation still works here, where we can do variable 3 is equal to variable 1 plus variable 2. So what would the value of variable 3 be? Right, as people are now starting to say in this chat, my name is Bob, hi, bye, please don't spam. So earlier on, people said that one way to add a space is to add a comma, and that's technically true, but you want to build the habit of understanding that string concatenation is using a plus sign instead of a comma because that actually gives the value. So again, it would print my name is Bob, hi, bye. So strings can also do a lot of other things. One thing we can think of is indexing. The idea of indexing is if you were to take this string, let's take hello, and you were to chop it up into as many pieces as possible, you would make every character its own little part, right? So string indexing is basically taking this string of hello and then taking each character, giving it and assigning it a number, and then telling you the total amount of characters you have. But one thing that is really important in Python is that whenever we use this thing called indexing, and when we chop this into little pieces, we always start at 0. I don't know why, but we always start at 0. For example, in this string, if we were to take these little pieces, what index do you think what index do you think O would be? Okay, so there's, again, one thing that's really important is that we start at 0. So you can't directly count from H and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Instead, you have to start at 0 and count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a little bit confusing at first, but as you end up programming a little bit more, it gets clearer. So we have our hello world index O being at 4. And then we can do this, but we can also find the value of, sorry, the numbers aren't aligned. We can also find the value of the certain character at the index. So what character is at index 2? Right, so, oops, sorry. The value at index 2 would be L, because if we count, we can go 0, 1, 2, and we get the letter L. And when you end up typing statements, like earlier we had my name is Bob, the space right here, do you guys think it counts as a character? Right, as it says on the slide down here, spaces do end up counting as characters. So when you have a statement, let's go back to my name is Bob. What character do you think is at the index of 4? A, right? Because we can count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so another part of strings that we can learn is that we can kind of cut strings up. We can take a single portion of the string and then call it a substring. And the way to do this is we have the string name and then we have the starting index, we have the starting index and then the ending index. So again, with the example of hello, how do you think we could get the index of HE? So string slicing, the idea is that we take the starting index and then the ending index plus 1, and then in order to get H and E, okay, good. So people are private messaging me and also on the chat. And so the idea is we can use 0 to 2 because we have 0 being H and then 2 being L. And then a cool thing about Python is that it's pretty smart. So if you have, instead of 0, you can always just instead leave a space, because then Python will know, okay, I'll start at the first index, aka the 0th index. And then in a similar way, if we were to go all the way at the end of the string, then we would we could instead leave this blank. Oh, by the way, I kind of forgot to mention this, but the length of the string, let's say the index ends at 4, right? What do you think the length of the string hello is? Okay, so it's important not to get tricked here. Right, as San says, it's 5 because it's still 5 characters. So even though the index may start at 0, the actual length of the string is still 5. So the Python command is len string. So let's take our string 1 and call it, someone give a random phrase again. Okay, let's try. Hi. So if we were to take and print the length of string 1, what do you think this would return? Great, it would return 3 because we have H, I, and then exclamation point. So now we're going to move on to the last type, and it's called Boolean. So Boolean is really interesting because it only has a true or a false value. So it's basically a value that can only have capitalized T true or capitalized F false. So let's say we have variable 1 is equal to true. Note that there are no quotes around this because it's not a string. It's a very different type. Variable 2 equals false. And true and false are keywords that, by the way, you can't have as variable names. And it's demonstrated here because it turned this nice purplish color. So Boolean values, we're going to talk about this a lot more in the next class, but they have different operators like and, or, and not. And we are definitely going to talk about in the next class. So right now, let's go over some examples and problems. Is 123 cat a valid variable name? This one's kind of tricky, so type in the chat what you think. Oh, by the way, so the class link next week's class is going to be on Thursday at the same time. So again, it is not a valid variable name because even though variables can contain numbers, they can't contain numbers at the very front. So what do you think would be an alternative an alternative variable name instead of 123 cat? Great, cat123 or this underscore 123 cat because because the first character cannot be a number. What about this one? Add an explanation to why it is a valid variable name or why it is not. Like just a couple words. Great, because it has the $sign and you can only have alphabet letters or numbers, aka alphanumeric numbers, like characters. Okay, what about this code? By the way, you can also try and actually run it on whatever Python software you have.